Count them. 9 consecutive nights of American bombs falling on Iranian soil. 9 nights of air raid sirens cutting through darkness in cities that most people watching this could not have located on a map a month ago. 9 nights of a region holding its breath between the last explosion and the next one, calculating whether this is the night when something happens that changes the character of this conflict permanently. Something that moves it from a sustained military campaign into a category of event that does not have a name yet because nothing quite like it has happened before. And now the fire is not slowing down. It is spreading. From the deserts near Isfahan, where American munitions have been systematically removing the air defense networks protecting the most sensitive remaining nuclear infrastructure in Iran, to the ports of Chabahar in the far southeast, struck again and again across consecutive nights until the control towers are rubble and the port's ability to coordinate anything is gone. From the narrow oil-choked waters of the Strait of Hormuz, where a vessel was reported on fire over the weekend and traffic has slowed to its lowest level in 3 weeks, to the northwestern city of Tabriz, hit for the very first time in this conflict, marking the moment when this campaign crossed the geographic boundary that separated the Gulf theater from the Iranian interior and demonstrated that there is no part of this country that is outside the operational reach of what is currently being brought to bear against it. This is no longer a skirmish. This is no longer a calibrated military operation designed to send a message while preserving diplomatic options. What is happening right now is America's longest sustained air campaign against Iran. In the history of the relationship between these two countries, 9 consecutive nights of strikes that have been escalating in scope, in geographic distribution, in target category, and in the explicit language of their purpose. And 17 American service members are dead. 17. Not a statistic. 17 human beings who left bases and families and lives and did not come back. And CENTCOM confirmed over the weekend that the remains of a missing American soldier, a service member whose status had been listed as missing in action following an Iranian attack, have been found. Identification pending. That phrase, identification pending, is the military's way of saying that there is a family somewhere that does not yet know with official certainty what they already know in every other sense. And while that identification is being completed, the bombs are still falling. The 9th night of strikes happened. The 10th is being planned. And the fire that started at the coast has reached Tabriz. But let's back all the way up, because to understand what 9 consecutive nights of American strikes against Iran actually represents, not just as a military campaign, not just as a collection of dramatic footage and CENTCOM statements and Iranian counterclaims, but as a strategic moment whose implications extend far beyond the geographic boundaries of the Persian Gulf, you need to understand the full picture of what is being struck, what Iran is doing in response, what the global economic indicators are already reflecting, and why the combination of all 3 is producing something that neither Washington nor Tehran is fully in control of anymore. Start with what CENTCOM confirmed for the 9th consecutive night of strikes. The target, set in the latest operational package, covered Iranian military command centers, air defense installations, coastal surveillance units, maritime capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and communications networks, all in a single coordinated wave. Read that target list carefully, because it describes something more specific than generic military infrastructure being degraded. It describes the systematic dismantling of a specific operational architecture, the integrated system through which Iran commands, coordinates, tracks, communicates, and executes the maritime harassment campaign that has made the Strait of Hormuz a war zone for commercial shipping. Command centers gone means the people giving orders cannot give them as effectively. Air defense gone means the people executing orders cannot be protected from the aircraft finding them. Coastal surveillance gone means the people watching the water cannot see what is coming. Communications networks severed means all of these degraded components cannot talk to each other even at the reduced effectiveness that surviving damage would allow. This is not target destruction in the sense of removing individual pieces of equipment from the battlefield. This is network destruction, the systematic elimination of the connective tissue that makes a military organization function as a coherent, coordinated force, rather than a collection of isolated and disconnected units. Washington is not just hitting missiles. It is trying to blind Iran, deafen it, and cut off its ability to fight back at sea in a coordinated way. The distinction matters enormously for understanding why 9 nights of strikes have not produced the kind of complete elimination of Iranian response capacity that a campaign focused solely on individual weapon systems would suggest. Because individual weapons can survive even when the network that coordinates their use is gone, which means that Iran can still fire missiles and drones at American positions across the region, even as the command and control architecture that would allow those fires to be precisely targeted and strategically coordinated is being progressively eliminated. The missiles that hit Jordan and killed American service members were fired by an organization whose targeting capability has been degraded. That is a disturbing thought, that a degraded IRGC is still capable of killing American troops, And it is the honest thought that the available evidence requires. Iran is hitting back hard, wide, and with an unpredictability that reflects the specific operational character of an organization whose strategic command architecture is under sustained pressure, but whose dispersed proxy network and surviving missile capacity continue to provide the ability to impose costs across a wide geographic area. The IRGC has claimed a strike on the United States Special Operations Hub at Al-Tanf in Syria, the second time in this escalation that this specific facility has been targeted, framed by Iran as retaliation for American strikes that killed Iranian soldiers near Iran Shahar. Al-Tanf is not a routine military installation. It is a facility associated with American Special Operations presence in Syria, in a location that carries specific strategic significance for the regional military geometry. Striking it twice in the same escalation cycle is a statement about Iranian willingness to reach beyond the immediate Gulf theater and impose costs on American presence across a wider geographic area than the Strait of Hormuz confrontation alone. The IRGC additionally claims to have struck an early warning radar and hit an MQ-9 drone hangar at Ali Al-Salam Air Base in Kuwait. These claims carry the uncertainty weight that all IRGC operational claims require. The pattern of Iranian overclaiming has been established firmly enough across this conflict that unverified IRGC damage assessments must be held at arm's length until independent confirmation arrives. But the claims are specific in character, naming specific system types at specific locations, which is itself an intelligent signal about the targeting data Iran has developed for American military infrastructure across the region, regardless of whether the specific strikes achieved the effects claimed. Jordan has confirmed that Iranian missiles fell inside its territory. Not merely intercepted over it, but fell inside it. Kuwait says its water infrastructure was hit, and the United States Embassy in Bahrain has issued a warning to Americans that Iran may target the capital Manama itself, the city that hosts the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet, the command brain of American naval operations across the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea. When a superpower issues what amount to evacuation-style warnings for its own diplomatic personnel in a third country, that is not standard operational security communication. That is an assessment of threat severity that has crossed a threshold serious enough to require public warning, and the threshold it has crossed is the one between the conflict as something affecting military installations, and the conflict is something that now threatens civilian diplomatic infrastructure in the capital city of an American ally. This war has stopped respecting borders. That is not a rhetorical formulation. It is a geographic description of what the available confirmed reporting shows. Missiles in Jordan, water infrastructure in Kuwait, strikes threatened against Manama in Bahrain, an Iranian delegation targeted in Yemen, American positions struck in Syria, Iraqi oil terminals hit by Iranian-backed militia forces, suspending crude loading at all Iraqi terminals. The conflict that began as a confrontation over the Strait of Hormuz has expanded across every border that separates the strait from the broader Middle East. And the expansion is happening simultaneously in multiple directions with no obvious geographic limit visible in the current trajectory. Now, the number that every finance minister on earth is watching, because the economic dimension of what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz is the story that will outlast the military campaign regardless of how the military campaign resolves. Brent crude oil at $90 per barrel, the highest level in over a month, and climbing. Traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has slowed to its lowest level in 3 weeks. A vessel was reported on fire in these waters over the weekend. The artery through which approximately 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply normally flows every single day, under conditions that the global energy system has been built around, and that global energy pricing assumptions have been calibrated to, that artery is barely functioning. It is hostage. Again. The $90 Brent figure deserves analytical attention that goes beyond its headline value, because oil price movements at this scale do not stay in the energy sector. They move through the entire global economy with a speed and breadth that creates cascading effects across every industry and every household that depends on energy-linked products and transportation, which is to say, every industry and every household on Earth. A sustained period of $90 plus oil produced by a military confrontation that shows no clear resolution timeline creates specific economic pressures for governments that are already managing inflation, that have already drawn down strategic reserves to buffer against the initial disruption, and that are now calculating how much longer they can sustain those buffers before the political cost of sustained energy price elevation becomes greater than the political cost of demanding resolution from the parties to the conflict. That external economic pressure is the variable that neither Washington nor Tehran controls, and it operates on a timeline that is entirely independent of the military and diplomatic calculations that are driving decisions inside both governments. Ships are not just delayed in the strait right now. They are making the calculation, vessel by vessel, operator by operator, cargo owner by cargo owner, about whether the risk of transit is worth the value of the cargo And the answer that most of them are reaching is that it is not. Insurance premiums for vessels operating in or near the Gulf have reached levels that make the commercial math of Strait of Hormuz transit economically irrational for many operators. The vessels that are moving are either doing so with transponders disabled, invisible to commercial tracking, operating anonymously in waters where anonymity itself is evidence that something is wrong, or they are the vessels that have no choice, whose specific cargo commitments or contractual obligations override the normal commercial risk calculations. The volume that is moving is a fraction of what moves under normal conditions, and every day that fraction holds at its current level is another day of accumulated economic pressure building across the global energy system in ways that cannot simply be released when the military confrontation eventually ends. The Tabriz strikes are the geographic development that requires the most careful analysis in the current operational picture, because Tabriz represents a qualitative expansion of this campaign that the previous 8 nights had not crossed. Everything struck in the first 8 nights was within the Gulf theater or its immediate maritime approach. The Strait of Hormuz, the coastal provinces of southern Iran, the port cities and coastal defense installations, and maritime harassment infrastructure that constitute the immediate operational geography of the confrontation over Hormuz shipping. Tabriz is in the northwest. It is not a coastal city. It is not part of the Strait of Hormuz theater in any geographic sense. Tabriz is the home of an Iranian space and missile base, specifically the kind of infrastructure associated with the underground missile city network that stores and launches the ballistic missiles that have been killing American troops and striking Allied positions across the region. Reaching Tabriz means the targeting architecture has expanded beyond the immediate theater of the maritime confrontation and is now operating against the ballistic missile infrastructure that sustains Iran's ability to strike American positions anywhere in the region, not just the IRGC's capacity to harass ships in the strait. The geographic expansion has 2 simultaneous strategic effects that run in different directions. On one hand, it degrades the ballistic missile infrastructure that has been the primary tool through which Iran has been imposing costs on American military positions. Striking Tabriz reduces the capacity that has been killing Americans in Jordan and threatening the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. On the other hand, it extends the campaign into parts of Iran that have not previously been touched, which changes the domestic Iranian political picture in ways that are difficult to model from outside. Populations that have been watching the war happen in provinces far from their own lives, relate to a conflict differently than populations that are now watching it arrive in their own cities. The strikes in Tabriz are not just a military development. They are a political communication to the Iranian population in the northwest that this conflict has no geographic safe zone for them, which is the same communication that the worldwide caution alert issued by the State Department sent to Americans abroad. Now let's examine what is happening at Isfahan with the specific analytical attention it deserves, because Isfahan's role in the current operational picture is different from every other target city in this campaign. The difference matters enormously for understanding where the campaign is heading. Isfahan is the location where highly enriched uranium has been stored, the most sensitive remaining nuclear material in Iran's program, the material whose status is the central question in every diplomatic conversation about Iran's nuclear ambitions, the material whose production represented the objective of Fordo's enrichment program before the strikes that may have significantly damaged that program. The strikes at Isfahan that have been confirmed are not strikes on the nuclear material itself. They are strikes on the air defense networks protecting the facility that houses that material. Air defense suppression around a nuclear facility is the doctrinal precursor to a strike on the nuclear facility. It removes the protective layer before the strike on what the protective layer was protecting. The sequence is the same one that this campaign has executed against every previous high-value target. Strip the defenses, then strike the target. The Isfahan air defense suppression is either the doctrinal preparation for a strike on the nuclear facility, or it is the most consequential coincidence in the targeting sequence of this entire campaign. The probability of the former is significantly higher than the probability of the latter. 17 American service members killed since this war began. That number needs to be held in the analysis alongside everything else, because it is the number that determines the domestic political sustainability of the military campaign and the number that shapes the public and institutional American response to every subsequent Iranian action. 17 is not an abstraction. 17 is the count of families that have received the worst news a military family can receive, multiplied by 17 across this single conflict. Tyler James Feen, Isabella Gonzalez, 15 others whose names belong in this accounting as fully as those two, and the remains of a service member found this weekend, identification pending, which means the number may be confirmed at 18 before the 10th night of strikes is completed. President Trump framed the 9th night's strikes explicitly as being carried out in honor of the American troops killed in the conflict. That framing is the public face of an institutional dynamic that runs deep in American military culture, The obligation to respond when American service members are killed, not as a matter of revenge in the emotional sense, but as a matter of strategic communication about the cost of targeting American forces. An adversary that attacks American troops and faces no meaningful response learns that the cost of attacking American troops is acceptable. An adversary that attacks American troops and faces 9 consecutive nights of escalating strikes, followed by strikes on underground missile cities in provinces that have never been hit before, followed by air defense suppression around nuclear facilities, followed by the explicit statement from the president that we are going to end it. That adversary is receiving a different lesson about the cost structure of targeting American military personnel. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's statement that Washington remains open to a diplomatic solution carries the specific analytical weight of a statement made against the backdrop of 9 consecutive nights of bombing. The diplomatic door is open in the American formulation, but the terms of whatever passes through it are being set by the military campaign's trajectory rather than by a negotiating process operating independently of it. The blockade stays until a final deal. The strikes continue until the conditions that produced them are resolved. The open door is not an unconditional offer of de-escalation. It is an offer to stop what is currently happening in exchange for an outcome that permanently addresses the conditions: Iran's nuclear program, Iran's capacity to threaten international shipping, Iran's funding and direction of proxy forces across the region that produced the conflict in the first place. The distance between that American position and any position Iran's hardline command structure would accept is the distance that the military campaign is working to close through physical destruction of the leverage that Iran has been using to demand better terms. Tehran shows no public sign of faltering. That needs to be stated honestly, because analysis that overstates the degree to which Iranian resistance has collapsed distorts the picture in ways that produce bad strategic predictions. The IRGC is claiming new strikes almost daily across Gulf nations. Iranian state media continues to frame the conflict in terms of Iranian strength and American failure. The Supreme Leaders Circle continues to issue statements about unforgettable lessons and American violations of agreements. The proxy network continues to operate. The PMF in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen with their Bab el-Mandeb contingency plans, the forces that struck Al-Tanf in Syria. The regime's information management apparatus continues to function, continues to produce the counter-narrative that serves its domestic audience, continues to assert that significant military capability remains unused and will be deployed if American attacks continue. None of that is fiction in the sense of being entirely disconnected from operational reality. Iran retains capability. The country's size has protected portions of its military inventory from the strike packages that have been executed. The proxy network has operational autonomy that the strikes against Iranian territory have not directly addressed. The hardline institutional culture that has driven escalation past every diplomatic threshold is not going to recommend surrender because 9 nights of strikes have been severe. It is going to recommend the same thing it has always recommended, which is defiance, expressed through whatever remaining capacity can be committed to demonstrating that the IRGC cannot be bombed into submission without cost. But the honest assessment of that resilience needs to be placed alongside the honest assessment of what 9 nights of strikes have actually accomplished. Because resilience and survivability are not the same as strategic viability. The IRGC can still fire missiles. It demonstrated this by killing 17 Americans. It cannot fire missiles at the same tempo, from the same locations, with the same command coordination, with the same replenishment rate that it could before the campaign began. Its coastal defense infrastructure has been systematically destroyed. Its air defense network has been progressively blinded. Its underground missile storage has been struck, including in Tabriz. Its petrochemical production capacity for missile propellant chemistry has been hit at the Crude facility. Its port infrastructure is degraded across every major southern port. Its rail and bridge connections between the coast and the interior are cut. Its command networks are being severed. And if the Isfahan air defense suppression is what doctrinal logic suggests it is, the air defense coverage of the most sensitive remaining nuclear material is being removed in preparation for what comes next. The 3 simultaneous pressure tracks have reached a convergence point that the 9-day campaign has produced, and that the next phase of the campaign is building on. Financial pressure at $90, a barrel of Brent crude, with the Strait at its lowest traffic level in 3 weeks, with the blockade closing every alternative maritime pathway for Iranian revenue, with the Karun strike reducing the industrial capacity through which missile production could be sustained, and with the accumulated economic weight of 300% annual inflation on a population that had already been in the streets before any of this began. Military pressure across 9 consecutive nights that have moved from coastal defense to interior missile cities to nuclear facility air defense suppression, with the GBU-57 having been used against Fordo, and with the explicit presidential statement that the objective is now to end it rather than to calibrate it. Psychological pressure on a regime whose foundational strategic belief that underground depth provided permanent protection from American conventional military power has been tested in combat and has failed, while simultaneously managing a domestic population whose economic suffering has been visible in protests across multiple cities, and whose awareness of the gap between the regime's strength rhetoric and the physical reality of burning ports and struck missile cities is not something that information management alone can bridge. The global audience watching this conflict is not limited to the parties directly involved. Every defense ministry in every capital that has been making strategic planning decisions based on assumptions about what American conventional military power can and cannot reach is now updating those assumptions against confirmed combat evidence that did not exist before this conflict began. The GBU-57's combat use against Fordow is not a regional development. It is a global signal, a demonstration that the gap between what adversaries believed was safely underground and what American air power can reach has closed in ways that change strategic calculations in Pyongyang, in Beijing, in Moscow, in every capital where underground depth has been part of the deterrence architecture. 9 nights of strikes that have progressively dismantled Iran's military capacity while demonstrating the operational effectiveness of platforms and weapons that had not previously been tested in this environment. That is not just a story about Iran. It is a demonstration watched by every state actor that has been calculating American military capability and resolve against its own strategic planning. Where does this go from here? Secretary Rubio says the diplomatic door is open, the bombs are still falling, the price of oil is at $90 and climbing, 17 Americans are dead, the remains of an 18th are being identified. Tabriz has been struck for the first time. Isfahan's air defenses are being stripped, the blockade holds, the underground missile cities are burning, and the mountain near Natanz, the facility whose construction has continued through every ceasefire and every diplomatic pause, whose depth was engineered specifically to exceed the penetration capability of the weapon that just hit Fordow. That mountain is still the unresolved variable that all of this has been building toward. The honest answer to the question of where this goes is that nobody in Washington or Tehran is providing a publicly honest account of how many nights are left. Washington says it will continue until the conditions are resolved. Tehran says it will continue until the Americans stop. Both statements are true in their own terms, and together they do not describe a path to resolution that has an identifiable near-term endpoint. What they describe is a conflict that has developed its own momentum, a momentum built from 17 dead Americans, from the IRGC's institutional culture of defiant escalation, from the underground missile cities burning in Tabriz, from the air defense suppression around Isfahan, from $90 oil in a strait that barely functions, from a ship burning in waters off Oman, and a vessel listing and sinking in the same waters where 20% of the world's oil supply is supposed to flow freely. 9 nights down. The 10th is already planned, but the target deck is expanding. More provinces, deeper infrastructure, higher value facilities. The geographic safe zones inside Iran are shrinking with each successive night. The financial pressure accumulates with each day the blockade holds, and the strait remains below capacity. The diplomatic door is open, but the terms of what passes through it are being written not in a negotiating room, but in the mission planning cells, where the next wave of strikes is being prepared. The fire that started at the coast has reached Tabriz. The air defenses around Isfahan are gone. The mountain near Natanz is waiting, and the families of 17 Americans, from Hawaii, from Carrollton, Texas, from 14 other places, whose names belong in this accounting as fully as the 2 we know, are living in the permanent aftermath of a war that is still counting its nights. Nobody in Washington or Tehran is telling us how many nights are left. The skies over the Strait of Hormuz are telling us something different. They are telling us that the fire spreads, night by night, province by province, facility by facility, until something changes that has not changed yet, and that the change, when it comes, will not announce itself in advance. 9 nights. The 10th is already being loaded.